Hi everyone, this is Dan, and this is Watchmen versus Squadron Supreme Part Dos. So I've kind of already gone over the background of both of these books, so I'm not going to bore you anymore for that. I'm just going to get right into it. So let's start with Watchmen first. So last we left off, we found out the comedian is dead. There's a lot of back and forth about who the comedian was and what kind of background he had. Spoiler alert, not very good. And sort of the main introductions of all the main players of Watchmen. So Rorschach, Ozymandias, Dr. Manhattan, the Silver Spectre, Night Owl, all those other guys, right? So in this issue right here, issue number 2, it's primarily flashbacks and basically retelling of stories that occurred in the past to support the ongoing narrative of Watchmen, mainly to do with the comedian. And it's a very depressing issue, if I'm just being honest, looking at the issue objectively after I finished reading it. This has kind of like been an interesting go through, because normally when I read Watchmen, I kind of burn through the whole series in one sitting, and now I'm kind of like forcing myself to sit down and read the issue and evaluate it by itself on its own merit. And my prediction going into this series was that Squadron Supreme would end up looking better on an issue-to-issue basis than Watchmen. And for the most part, it's kind of been that way, but there's been a lot of interesting aspects of Watchmen sort of rereading it. So first part, you open up and you get a 9-panel spread. And basically you have 2 concurrent scenes going on. You have the scene of the funeral occurring, the comedian's funeral, and most of the big players here. You got, Dr. Manhattan. Rorschach is basically sitting in the background with his The End Is Nigh freaking psycho character. You had the Night Owl, a bunch of other characters too there. Meanwhile, you have the Silver Spectre visiting her mother, the original Spectre, in the hospital in California. And you have like really, really good dialogue. The dialogue in the beginning of this issue is very good. I really enjoy the back and forth between the Silver Spectre and her mom. Her mom kind of showing, sort of the epitome of a aging woman, coming to the end of their life and remembering things in the past with a more optimistic view of it than what actually happened, just because of the sort of imminence of her death upcoming, which is kind of frightening her and making her look into the past to find solace in her life, right? And it's great stuff. The artwork, obviously, by Dave Gibbons here is fantastic. A lot of great work here. I love this panel right here. Really, really good. And what kind of goes through is sort of a retelling of the sort of original superhero team from the past that the original Silver Spectre was a part of, and her encounter with the comedian, where basically the comedian, being a piece of shit, tries to attempts to rape her and gets the beats the living crap out of her until he gets the shit kicked out of him by this character right here. And she's kind of like remembering all of these past events, kind of traumatized herself, her mother, and she can't help but end up basically forgiving the comedian despite all of the awful things that he did, which discuss her daughter intensely. The dialogue here between mother and daughter is like fantastic. I think Alan Moore really hits it out of the ballpark with this line of dialogue right here. Even though this is kind of slow moving, again, this issue is Dave Gibbons is able to draw perfect scenes, and Alan Moore is able to write perfect dialogue. But being perfectly honest, just as a criticism of this issue, it's almost kind of a wasted issue, just because the plot technically doesn't move. Instead, what the issue is spent on is basically telling the setting and developing the backgrounds of the character more. which again is probably why I remember Watchmen more so of reading through it in one sitting than I do reading each individual issue. I mean, if I had to wager a guess, I can imagine Watchmen wasn't nearly as big of a deal when it first came out as it eventually led to be. Just because I can imagine myself buying these issues one-on-one and being like, what the fuck, nothing happened. Which is kind of like what modern comics are, to be honest. And I mean, you know, that is the weakness of this issue right here when I look at it. It's just like nothing actually really happened here. We're just kind of talking about all the awful things the comedian did in the past. You know, and it continues, right, with the creation of the Crime Busters, which is sort of the newer group here, and the comedian being a fairly nihilistic character in all of this. And then further scenes right here with him in Vietnam, basically being, you know, for lack of a better term, a mercenary and a murderer for the U.S. government. Yeah, in fact, he basically murders this pregnant Vietnamese woman in the middle of this scene. And Dr. Manhattan does nothing, by the way. This is kind of where the sort of darkness and grimness of superheroes that Alan Moore is going for in this series. Very, very depressing in a way, especially if you kind of like superheroes. It's kind of sad and also in some areas kind of gross. But in a way, you know, I could see why it had such an impact at the time, because no one was really doing this. This was definitely like an HBO series, but set in the 80s when no one really had seen this, you know, in comics. This really is very grim, very dark, right? So here's you know, Night Owl and the comedian just basically busting up you know, rioters. Here's the first you know, sign of who watches the Watchmen. This is kind of there's a lot of like quotes from songs, philosophers, all kinds of other stuff. A lot of stuff pulled from literature and media in general that Alan Moore uses to really enrich this. I had a friend who told me that they were actually assigned to read Watchmen in an English literature class, which doesn't surprise me because that's kind of Alan Moore's style, right? I think he would be very proud or happy to have this story be assigned in English literature classes, because that's kind of what, at least in my feeling when I read this, he was kind of going for. Something that would be, you know, kind of a shock factor for those who are fans of the superhero genre, right? Anyway, the funeral kind of breaks up and everyone kind of goes away except for Rorschach, who proceeds to chase down one of the attendees of the funeral, who ends up being basically an old villain of the comedian. And Rorschach, you know, basically questions him, busts his balls, and he admits that the comedian kind of visited him, you know, several weeks before his death and had like basically a confession where he was kind of losing his shit and having like a mental breakdown. He kind of discovered a plot or something like that that had sort of broken his faith in a lot of things, and then he left, right? And Rorschach, you know, after some threatening and some discovery of drugs, you know, kind of keeps this guy on watch, right? And then you get the usual Rorschach journal of him lamenting the corruption and destruction of America as we know it. You know what's kind of interesting is, and a lot of people have commented this entire issue right here is another example of Rorschach, the attempt by Alan Moore to make this character unlikable, and the result of Alan Moore actually end up making this character more relatable than the other characters in this story. I kind of wonder if that was Alan Moore's intention. Not that I think Rorschach is a good character. He ultimately isn't. Alan Moore makes a lot of decisions with this character that is clearly he's not a good guy ultimately. But some of his actions and some of his, you know, thoughts end up making you like this character significantly more than the other characters who are just genuinely unlikable. Just a lot of characters in this book are just not good people. You know, that being said, this sort of, you know, commentary by Rorschach on, you know, the final depth of the comedian. And this great line of like just a feeling of depression and depravity in this story. Very, very dark and sad. As you get the final ending of, him saying goodbye to the comedian as we move through. So again, nothing actually happened in this issue. It was just basically a retelling of the background of the comedian and of these superheroes and really this world, right? Which I think is enjoyable if you, if you got through that first issue, which is sort of the mystery side to kind of intrigue you in. This is basically developing the setting in the background. And if you consider all 12 issues as one story, Watchmen is very well structured. If you try to look at each issue as its own individual story, not so great, which falls in direct comparison to what I'm about to go through here with Squadron Supreme. So we're going to go over issue number 2, oopsie, the stand right here, of the Squadron Supreme miniseries. And this issue, interestingly enough, is also kind of depressing, but in its own way, in a completely different way from what Watchmen. Watchmen is depressing because the world is presented as a bleak and dim place. All of the characters are pieces of shit and honestly unlikable and very flawed, very much, a lot of nihilism everywhere in the characters. In Squadron Supreme, it's more like a Greek tragedy, what you will notice when you go through issue number 2 here. So you get a nice splash page in the opening right here. You get Dr. Spectrum, the Archer, Tom Thumb, basically delivering food to parts of America. So this is after the Squadron Supreme have decided to appoint them as basically the peacemakers, protectors of Earth, and the creators of utopia and paradise, right? So they're attempting to solve all of the issues of the world as superheroes, not just, fighting villains and crime fighting. And they're delivering food to these people who are starving. And while they're doing that and getting their congratulations from the mayor, they basically get held up by these hoodlums who claim themselves to be freedom fighters and basically are angry at the Squadron Supreme because in previous issues they had basically taken over the world and thrown people in internment camps. And the Squadron tried to explain to the world that they were actually brainwashed by aliens, blah, blah, blah. But obviously, not everyone's going to believe that, and these people don't believe it in this particular group right here. So they decide that they're going to get justice for their fallen family and friends and decide to try to basically hold up the squad members and execute them. They get defeated by the Squadron Supreme members. Obviously, they are superheroes, right? And the squadron ends up flying off. And you also get to see Tom Thumb here, who's a little frustrated at his inability to really contribute and be sort of a preeminent superhero in the group. He's more of like the brains, not really the brawn or the muscle of the group, right? You also get the other plot point here in this issue, which is Nuke, one of the members of the Squadron Supreme, visiting his parents who are slowly dying from cancer and from radiation poisoning. And you get yet another plot point set up by Hyperion, who is everyone's basically reporting all the good deeds they've done in the world. They've kind of solved monetary problems, they've solved food issues, they've solved power stuff, all this stuff, and releasing people from internment camps and whatnot. And then Spectrum basically commenting like, yeah, we delivered the food, but these guys tried to hold us up and tried to kill us. And Hyperion commenting like, we've got to begin the disarmament program. And this is, cue, problems in the future right here. And they also get threatened by the Scarlet Centurion, one of these villains that they've had to face in the past. And Hyperion, in a very uncharacteristically not Superman manner, even though he's based off of Superman, flies up to Hyperion and basically says, if you try anything, I will literally kill you, which is very different from what superheroes normally do, right? And he ends up, basically scaring him off, and everyone's kind of happy about it, though a little bit concerning that Hyperion's so quick to try to kill someone right here. So the rest of the squad ends up having a poker game. Everything seems like a happy-go-lucky thing, and Tom Thumb kind of walks off in frustration as he goes off to his computer program Ada, whom he loves, right? And tries to sort of, put his mind into something that, he can be happy with and something that he can contribute to. And along comes Nuke. And here you see the two plot points kind of converge. Nuke asks Tom Thumb, hey, my parents are dying from cancer, and you're a genius. Do you think you can, potentially cure cancer right here? That's, of course, after like some other discoveries here, which Tom Thumb is like, whoa, cure cancer. Okay, that's a little bit of a leap right there for me. But Nuke kind of like takes his agreement to the request to try to cure cancer as him guaranteeing that he's going to cure cancer, which of course is going to lead to some ultimate disappointment. And the rest of the issue is really, aside from some small points right here, is really Tom Thumb trying his best, to basically do what no one else has done before, which find a cure for this stuff. And he ends up doing all kinds of crazy experiments on himself and everything else. He even ends up, going to talk to Scarlet Centurion, their main villain, using his time teleportation device to go and ask him for a cure for cancer. And, it's kind of interesting, a concept that a hero would come to a villain to ask for something for the good of other people. Unfortunately for him, even though he has a cure for cancer, he's a villain. So obviously, he will only give the cure to cancer to Tom Thumb if he basically helps him murder Hyperion, his friend, which Tom Thumb basically has to decline. And then at the end of it, he ends up coming home dejected and just telling Nuke that, you know what, I just can't cure cancer. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do for your parents. Nuke loses his shit and screams off like basically he's kind of like the teenage boy of the group. So he's frustrated and flies off. And then you get the really sad scene right here where Tom Thumb basically realized, well, you know what? If it makes you feel better, your parents won't be dying alone because, through my research, I found out I'm dying of cancer too. Really, really depressing, man. It's a very depressing issue. Both issues are really depressing, but I think in the case of Watchmen, it's mainly to do with the character and the setting and the history of everything. Whereas in Squadron Supreme, the depression is in the plot. This is truly good people attempting to do good things, but finding out, the infamous concept that the path to heaven, or the path to hell, I should say, is paved with good intentions. A lot of these people are trying to do good things. And in the case of Hyperion, he's doing whatever it takes, becoming basically a tyrant little by little to create his utopia. In the case of Tom Thumb, he did almost everything he could do to try to cure cancer. But he went to the point where it was like anymore, he would basically have to be, a murderer, an evil person himself in order to cure other people of cancer, and he wouldn't cross that moral boundary. Which in a way shows how great of a character and a person Tom Thumb is. This is kind of a way of showing how good a character is through actions rather than just through dialogue and development, right? This is sort of more of a classic storytelling theme. And I kind of like, I'm not going to lie, I enjoyed reading the Squadron Supreme chapter more than I enjoyed reading the Watchmen chapter. And it wasn't like a great contrast, like between, chapter one between the two, where they both had very different styles and they're very different questions that they posed to the reader. Both chapter 2s for Watchmen and Squadron Supreme were very depressing. But I felt that the moral lesson of this issue of Squadron Supreme, and honestly the philosophical dilemma here, is more interesting to me than what Watchmen was kind of showing, which is just pure, undiluted nihilism. What Mark Gruenwald did here in issue 1, to me, has enormous long-term value, and I really enjoyed reading this chapter. If you haven't read Squadron Supreme, I totally recommend it to you. It's good stuff and very, very underrated. Anyway, that's the video, guys. Obviously, we got a ton of issues to go through here, but trying to keep this series going very steadily and enjoying it while I am here. Anyway, guys, that's the video. Let me know what you think. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications. If you got any comments on Watchmen or Squadron Supreme issue 2 of either of these, leave it down below, and I will see you next time.